We are live. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Literary Roadhouse Book Club. Today we're discussing Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Saadawi. I'm Anais, joined by Gerald Hornsby and Colette Sartor. Hey, guys.
Hello.
I'm really excited to discuss this because Colette, while you were trying to connect back in, Gerald and I just started discussing it a lot. We're like, we need to save this. We need to save.
Oh my God, it was fascinating.
So good.
Yes. Fascinating. I have a confession. I read it all in one day, and
What?
my schedules sucked. But once I got started, I thought, oh my God, this is a breeze. I loved it. Anyway. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So it's funny. I was reading this also while on vacation, and it was a big group vacation. And one of the guys in the group, he's like, "Oh, what are you reading?" I go, "Frankenstein in Baghdad." He's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "It's exactly what it sounds like." So if that helps. So yeah, Gerald, what did you think of the book?
Loved it. Really loved it. It's I initially I was a bit skeptical because I do sometimes struggle with foreign language books that have been translated, but it's such a great story and so very, very well written that I really did love it. Very good book.
And something you were saying in the pre-show is when you saw it was going to be another story about sort of terrorism, conflict in the Middle East, it seemed like you had started to get a little exhausted by that, but this story didn't exhaust you in that way. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. I think what's good about this book, and it's quite similar with the book we read a few months ago, The Milkman, is that the story is set in a pretty horrendous situation where people die almost every day when it's a dangerous situation, but that is just a backdrop, and it impinges into the story occasionally, but what you're seeing is the characters that are living in this environment and living with this situation, and you realize that these people have they're not totally ruled by the situation that they're in. They've got their lives, they have a shop, they have a coffee shop, they go for drinks, they live their lives, and oh yeah, there's a car bomb, and but then they go back to their lives. I love that way of telling the story against something that we know so well, but you're getting a real insight into the people that live there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Colette, you were saying you read the story in one sitting.
Yes.
So did it grip you from page one, or was there a moment when you're like, this is amazing?
I think when I really got into it, honestly, I knew what it was about, obviously. And I kept looking like, how is he going to bring this element in? Because it felt like, we're in this world that's very reality based. And he just managed to flip my expectations with the storyteller. So it wasn't right away, but it was almost right away. Mm-hmm. And it was all of a sudden sewing this person together from body parts. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I found that absolutely fascinating. And I always love a story where we do have this, you're right, the backdrop is this deadly situation, but people take it in stride. It is just part of their lives. There is not an option to leave because this is their world. And then a fantastical element comes in that I didn't even want to try to pinpoint why I bought it. I just did. Mm-hmm. And I'm so envious of writers who can bring me into that world that's so reality based and yet has that one huge twist that just sucks me in. Yeah. So I loved Frankenstein. Loved him.
Yeah. And I would say it has one twist or like one and a half or two.
Yeah.
Because the Department of Tracking and Pursuit is insane. It's bananas.
Oh, hysterical.
It's incredible.
But again, to me, that's all kind of, and that's one of those things where that's one of the ways with that opening report. Actually, with the opening report, I have to say, I read the opening report. I'm like, ooh, this is like Handmaid's Tale. Love it already. Because it's a way to get us into that world where it's what we think it is, but not. Mm-hmm. There's that twist of, because that whole department just made me laugh.
Yeah.
And yet it was frightening.
Yeah. And also you were saying you think you know what it is and that it's not. I also had that experience with Baghdad because my conception of Baghdad came very much from the news coming out of the war. So you're like, oh, Sunnis versus Shiites, Muslim, okay, right. But it was very like sort of a narrow view. And this really opened it up to the way that different religions, cohabitated, were side by side in the same neighborhood, all the different sections, just thinking like, each section has like its own sort of like neighborhood that people know about and how you move between them. Like there was one section that was like, oh, they shared the bus to this stop because from there you can get a transfer to this other spot. All the journalists that worked at the magazines together, that would normally be very boring, but it just made me like remember like this is a real city. Like it's not just Baghdad. It's a real city with real neighborhoods and a whole bunch of different religions that have been living there for a long time. And its own different set of politics. That's not just the narrow one that we would look at when we're looking at the Iraq War. And I love that. I love that so much. Like I just felt like I really got to understand this city that I had honestly never thought that much about, despite the fact that we invaded it. Isn't that insane? Like now I'm learning about it. Yeah, I love that. And that is such an important service as well, just in terms of like what this book is doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a temptation if you're going to write a story in this environment to make it about the environment. So we over here we have a lot of books written by ex special forces people, and it's all about the shooting and the tracking and the all that sort of the intelligence and that sort of stuff, which is fine. But this is a much better way of telling a story, by telling the story of the real people with just that backdrop that just comes in and goes out. It's a fantastically rich story.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes for a much more rich story because I'm not as interested. What you describe is that if you've got the book that's about that is when the story's about you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. It's a love novel that is about like that's going to be espionage, this or that, and I'm quite frankly that's not my cup of tea. I'd rather have that, the world of violence and terror and war be the backdrop for real world stories, real people, because it's more intimate.
Yeah.
It's a more intimate way to, honestly, it's a more intimate way for people like me who've never experienced living. I mean, I've lived through riots, sure, but I've never lived long-term in that kind of violent setting. And it allows that world to become so much more real to me to experience it through everyday people and everyday events. And then these couple of, like you said, fantastical elements that to me actually enrich that world, so that makes this book have so much appeal to me, because you're right, Gerald, we've got that milkman-like backdrop, and that's another book I loved. But with the fantastical elements, it's even more wonderful to me.
Yeah. And the author spent a lot of time zooming in on really petty people crap. Like the whole rivalry between Abu Anmar, the owner of the hotel, and Faraj, the realtor, right? Like,
yes.
Oh my God.
Abu Anmar is going into Faraj, the realtor's office for the first time. And it's like, literally, by that point, we have seen Frankenstein set up his own militia with a bunch of followers. Crazy stuff's happening left and right, but we're going to pause. We're going to return to the saga of the hotel owner versus the realtor. I love that. Like, okay, yes we're doing this.
Which is it's fabulous because it kind of gets us back into, oh yeah, we've still got these petty grievances and these rivalries, these everyday rivalries that rule everyday life.
Yeah. So let's go back to the Frankenstein, because is he the main character? I don't even know. There's so many characters.
There's so many. That's because to me, Alishva, is that how you say her name?
I think so, yeah.
Although she started out seeming like the main character, she wasn't.
No. And then was it Mahmoud? I don't think it's Mahmoud.
I don't think it's Mahmoud either.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Is it Hadi?
Yes. You
Maybe
know what?
Hadi.
Maybe it is. I think because Hadi is the father figure.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
And I have to say, one of the elements that I loved near the end was when we find out what really happened to his the alleged reason for him putting the body parts together in the first place. His friend who died, and all he could get were body parts.
Yeah.
That, to me, I think that was the one element that makes me think, oh, you're right, maybe it's Hadi. Because it really kind of brought everything together and made me say, oh, that's the more human element behind why Frankenstein came to be.
Yeah, and Hadi, I think, is the only one that interacts with almost every other major character as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because he seems such a small character because he's not intrinsically involved in driving the plot forward, particularly apart from making the Frankenstein figure. But he's involved and he's on the periphery. Initially I thought it was the Mahmoud, the journalist, who was the central character, because it seemed to be centered around what he was doing, but actually it moved away from him, and he became a secondary character.
I just realized as you were saying that, because why did Mahmoud become a secondary character? Because nothing he did matters. Nothing Alishva does matters. Nothing, like, it's the surrealness of the war. There's all these characters, and none of them ever do anything that matters to the plot in any real way. None of them actually change the course of anything, other than Hadi, who accidentally creates a Frankenstein. You know, like, and I think that's significant, right? Like, Mahmoud doesn't have like an article that changes anyone's perception of anything. Frankenstein never actually makes any sort of political impact. He just becomes yet another sect in this bizarre, fragmented war. Brigadier Majid falls in disgrace, never catches him. Alishva eventually goes and lives with her family, as she should have done all along, probably. Yeah, nothing matters. Faraj, the realtor, gets the properties, and they get blown up because nothing matters.
Yes.
So,
And yet there's a really strong driving action. Like, I feel like I'm compelled to keep reading.
yes.
So as you were saying that, I'm thinking to myself, so what really is the plot? If you want to look at it as a series of causally connected events, yeah, what's the plot? Because you're right, ultimately nothing any of the who you think are going to be the central characters or the main characters, nothing they do necessarily affect the forward motion of the plot, which I guess is each of the steps that Frankenstein takes to avenge the various victim body parts. You know, he has an effect.
He does. He has an effect. He's the only one that does things.
Yeah, and yet he doesn't necessarily feel like the central character.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't feel like, I can't even say necessarily, I can't qualify it. He doesn't feel like the main character.
Yeah.
Which is so odd. This is a
yeah.
And we could really get anybody to agree on who the main character is.
Yeah, I think when you look at for all the characters that we've named have their own story arcs and complete those arcs, and even except Frankenstein doesn't, because he still does anything happen to him? He's never caught, is he? He's never captured.
What happens to him is internal. It doesn't happen external. It's his realization that there's no innocents and no criminals. And at some point, he's just surviving for the sake of surviving, like everyone else. He basically just becomes yet another. He loses his mythical purpose, his high-minded purpose, and just becomes someone else trying to survive by any way they can. Who's afraid of dying? That's who he is by the end.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
that's quite, that's fascinating. Yeah, what is the plot? What is the because you at no point do you think you're just being told a tale that rambles on and on and on. There seems to be a point to it all, and you feel as though you're working your way towards a conclusion, a denouement. and yeah, it's just the sort of conclusion of all the other story arcs.
Colette, you keep freezing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Do you want to try taking your bandwidth down again, or maybe leaving the hangout and joining it again and seeing if
Try
that's
leaving and joining again.
Yeah.
So let me try leaving and joining again.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a shame, isn't it? Because when she first came back, she was good and stable and strong, and then not.
Yeah. I'm getting hungry. I haven't eaten yet.
What time is it?
1:30 something.
Wow.
Yeah. So while we're waiting, I'm texting my boyfriend, who's in the other room, to ask, "Hey, what are we doing for lunch?"
Yeah. Like you do.
Any better?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so far.
Oh, no, I spoke too soon.
Oh crap! Did I freeze? Am I there?
Yeah.
Yeah, you froze.
Oh dear God! I honestly, guys, I'm at a loss at this point. Let me see if I can call upstairs and see if anybody's. All right, let me mute myself.
Yeah, tell them to stop using
Hold
the
on.
internet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny whenever before I do a podcast, we have this little routine we go through where I go around saying, "Are we off the internet everywhere?" Oh, it just she understands and doesn't mind, but we have to play the game.
Yeah.
Can I watch something on catch up on the TV? No, obviously. So yeah.
What time does this bagel place close? I'm very hungry.
Yeah.
It closes at 3. So by the time we're done here, I'm gonna have to send him to get me a bagel.
Nice. Don't you have any food in?
All right.
We've been avoiding grocery shopping, and it's a problem.
I know.
Okay.
I'm back. Am I there?
Diner, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I've asked them to please kick themselves off the internet. Let's cross our fingers.
Okay.
Because we have so many
Excellent.
devices on this internet. I'm just hoping that having my child get the hell off of YouTube might help.
Yes.
Yes.
Which should not
Yeah.
be the case since we have high-speed internet and pay huge amounts of money for everything. Anyway.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so we're talking about how maybe the Frankenstein is the main character. We don't know, but so in many ways, he's very much like the original Frankenstein, sort of, kind of, not really, but we haven't said, for anyone who hasn't read the story, the way that Frankenstein is created is Hadi, who is a junk dealer, who is basically a squatter. But he has been collecting body parts after explosions in Baghdad, and he's been stitching them together, and then finally he gets the last piece he needs. He gets a nose, he puts it on, and when he puts the nose on, well, it doesn't come alive, actually. Around the same time, someone else got blown up in another part of Baghdad, a guard at a hotel, and his spirit is disembodied, and he needs to find a body before a certain time hits, because then bad things will happen. It's like, so he possesses this body because his body has been vaporized by a bomb. So then he goes in this body, and then he comes to life when Elishva, who is this widowed old lady whose her son Daniel died in the first sort of the Iraqi war of the 80s, early 90s.
20 years before, yeah.
20 years before. Is it early 90s, late 80s? But so he died then. Well, he's been missing, and she doesn't believe that he's dead. So she's calling out to him all the time. And then the spirit in this body made from everyone else hears this woman lamenting the son that she lost, and then comes to life. So there's like a lot going on here, very much related to death and war in Iraq. But then he's very much a Frankenstein. So there's some differences in how he was created. Do those differences have any significance for you, Colette?
You mean the differences in the way he was created from the original?
Yeah.
From the original? Mm-hmm. I mean, they have to. I mean, because there's such a huge cultural context to the way he was created. And I have to say, I particularly love the idea of the soul from the vaporized body from the security guard having to find another place to live. And we never know what the bad things are going to be that are going to happen, but it's enough. It's enough. And it really puts the story on a different track. It's about, the cultural differences are so vast that I feel like it necessarily influences the thematic underpinnings for why the differences in how Frankenstein was created exist in the first place. So, I mean, it's just it makes for such a different story. Yeah, I think there are, we're borrowing Frankenstein itself, we're borrowing the name, and we've got, a madman creating an alternative man, some bizarre Frankenstein who's never been seen, who's wreaking havoc. But that basic plot to me is where the similarity stops, because the cultural context so enriches everything that goes on in the story. And also, maybe we end up with similar visions of humanity and the thematic, the more general thematic underpinnings. But yeah, I feel like it's a very different story.
Yeah, I think it is, because the Baghdad Frankenstein has a moral purpose, and he's like an avenging angel sort of thing. And in the original one, it was just this crazy monster that goes and destroys things and people. So I liked the fact that this Frankenstein, yes, it's gruesome, and I loved the detail of how the body, once he'd avenged the death of one of his body parts, that body part then started to drop off or
melt
or just melt. It's pretty unpleasant. But I liked that idea that he's avenging the deaths of his constituent parts, and so I thought that was a really clever and intelligent thing to do with the concept. I thought that was a great step forward.
Yeah. And one of the things that stood out for me in the difference that they were conceived is, in the original Frankenstein, it's a very intentional thing that this madman scientist doctor is doing. So like, he knows exactly what he's trying to do. And it's almost like a weird position of twisted power, where Hadi is just grieving. He's just doing this because he lost his best friend, and these people who get blown up are given proper burials or even acknowledgement of their deaths. He doesn't think this thing is going to come alive. He's maybe trying to make a political statement, but before Frankenstein comes alive in this story, he had already, told himself, you know what, I'm going to take it apart and just get rid of it. This is insane. Like, he had that brief moment where he was like, I shouldn't be doing this. This is nuts. Yeah. So just that difference, where like, this one's kind of born from a weird reaction to grief, and the other one was like a madman trying to get power, and this one came from a place of powerless. Seemed like a really interesting contrast.
What do you think I was gonna say, what do you think about the fact that we actually don't find out, and I love this, but we actually don't find out Hadi's real reason for creating that body till near the end? I thought that was a wonderful withhold. That it could, because it's so, I'm curious what you guys thought about that.
I thought it was signposted really well, because by the time it was at the end, you had already figured it out. Like, he had already given you enough, pieces to figure it out. It was foreshadowed really well. But
I thought it was, I just love that. I love that we don't know that from the outset, that we don't know. I mean, we do have all the foreshadowing, but nobody comes out and says, look, this is why he did this, because his best friend was blown to bits, and that's all that was left, and grief drove him to it. And we know in the beginning that grief is driving it to a certain extent, but he makes such light of it and such a story. And to not find out the real emotional core, like for certain, the real emotional core for why he did it, I just thought that was so, usually I'd say, oh no, you need to know that earlier. I loved not knowing it till then. There's something about finding that out that actually gave me more sympathy for Frankenstein. I don't know why, but it was really, I just loved that element.
And I think you knew, even though you didn't know the real reason, you knew that there would be a reason for it. That
Yes.
he wasn't just doing it to play around or something. That there was a proper reason why he wanted to do this.
Yes, you know what? You're exactly right. That's what it is. I trusted the author enough because of the way he set up the story to know that eventually there was going to be that reveal. And also, Huddy felt that real. You know, he was an angry man. He clearly was, there was clearly something else driving his storytelling and driving this really bizarre reaction to what's going on in the city, which is to sew together a man out of the body parts he finds just because they're in the city, because it's an everyday thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
yeah, I think that's a good point. That yes, that he was, he walked along the street and found some body parts that he could use to make this creature up. Yeah.
Oh, the nose.
Oh dear. It's not good.
So when the rumors of the Frankenstein sort of go out into the public, a lot of people are scared of it, but some people are sort of inspired by it and seek him out. So he amasses this group of followers, but they're all sort of different. So why are different people following him? That whole section of the story was just like beyond. So Gerald, who are Frankenstein's followers and why are they following him?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I think there's a sort of religious undertone to this because they know that he can't be killed. He gets shot, but he doesn't die. So I think there creates this mythology around him that he is some sort of messiah figure that is only killing people who you could say deserve to be killed. So there are people willing to do his bidding and help him out in the things that he's doing. So that they he's a great sort of totem for a lot of the things that are wrong with their city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a really interesting way to delve into the religious underpinnings of the story. You know, because we've got Elishva, having her conversations nightly with St. George the Martyr. And, we've got all the religious sects, and we've got, because this is a religious city, with lots of, with all issues, everyone's fighting over religion. And so to actually have him, the Frankenstein be a messiah figure is absolutely fascinating because that's what he is. And look what it devolves into. It devolves into another civil war of sorts, within this little community that's created. That, who was it? Was it the magician who predicts that no good will come of this extended community that's developed?
Mm-hmm.
And he's right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. And there's a way in which, because they go out into that sort of dead zone where there's constant fighting, they just become yet another faction of people fighting in this dead zone, because then they're going out and they need to find new body parts, they're killing people, and they turn on each other. So there's a way in which what happens to that group is yet another continuation of what's happening in Baghdad and Iraq more generally, right?
Yeah.
Yet another militia believing in whatever they're believing, but then disagreeing internally and then infighting. That's like all of Baghdad. A lot of other groups fall apart that way as well, including the Department of Tracking and Pursuit, because the senior astrologer and the junior astrologer don't see eye to eye on how to handle
God, the astrologers are hysterical. They're just absolutely fantastic characters, and they're so briefly in the story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I love that they're wearing canonical hats. Like, how the author just like leans into type sometimes with the more fantastical elements. They have weird long beards tied at the end with a hair clip, canonical hats. They're running around with like tarot cards and sand, and it's just like he's not trying to make them cool. Like, it's not like, oh, they're considered astrologers, but they're like, in normal modern day clothing. No, like, just like lean all the way in, like a wizard stereotype. I love it.
And I think he obviously feels the freedom to be able to do that with some elements of the story, to go all in on the Frankenstein that just comes to life, and there's so many elements of this. against the real life of the people and against the backdrop of the war. And is these elements are sort of smashed together. Well, not really smashed together. They're placed together, and the story's woven around those three elements so skillfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm trying to find a line because now you were speaking. There's all those elements, and there's also the way in which the group as well has sections in it that mirror Baghdad at large. So remember, there's like the three sort of followers where one, the youngest one, he sees Frankenstein as Iraqi citizen number one, devoid of religion. It's more secular. Then there's the second one who sees him as like the destruction that comes before the coming of Christ. And then the last one sees him as the Messiah itself.
Yes.
So like the secular, two different religious spins on it. But I thought it was great because remember one of the other things that came up was the Baathists, which I looked up, which is all about a unified single Arab nation that is secular. It doesn't matter what religion you practice. I guess it's sort of reflected in this one who cares more about Iraqi citizen number one, and they all start naming themselves Iraqi citizen number two, number three, out into like the hundreds, which was just fascinating. How all these different sects, like some are religious and some aren't, which again you don't think about when you think about Baghdad or in our sort of like Western narrative of what's happening there or what happened there. And also there was and there was also this I don't know if you guys looked into the Baathist thing, which super interesting because the original like the lead thinker or philosopher who came up with the concept of it, he was actually Christian, but he said that the actual nation should be secular, dividing church and state, and that Islam itself should be revered as he wanted to fold it into the concept of a single unified Arab nation, more from a cultural perspective, that yes, there's religion aspect that's very real for a lot of people who are free to practice that religion, but from a purely cultural standpoint, it has given us great works of literature, incredible architecture, science. Culturally, it's a huge defining force for Arab identity. But it was super interesting. Anyway, I learned a lot just googling things.
You're amazing.
Yeah. Googling.
I'd love to do that, but oh my God, you're amazing. I usually do the books. I'm like, how did you find the time to do that?
I'm trying to find also, there's a whole line that is about fear, how everyone's motivated by fear. That I thought was wonderful. Like
that was amazing. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Let me see if I can find it. Because I have my
I think it's in the recordings. That's
former death because of fear. Oh my God, there's lots of fear. Yeah, so the recordings near the end, are we thinking?
Yeah, or there's a whole chapter called The Recordings, which is...
Right. Oh, here we go. Because I searched it on my Kindle. Let me see.
Oh, yeah, I see. I did a print so I can take pictures for Instagram.
Damn.
Yeah,
so exactly.
where is it on
I don't see it there. Because I know the exact line you're talking about.
It was so good. And I think is it Farad, the journalist on TV, who says it?
Oh, maybe. All right, let me search Farad.
Might be Farad who's talking about it. And he's talking about how the reason everyone's dying is because they're afraid that they're killing in order to survive, being killed because they're trying to survive.
Let me see.
It's such a good line. I wish I had marked it, but like I said, I read this on vacation, so I didn't have
pens. Hold on, let me see if I can. And I marked it, but I've not found a good. I need to bookmark more, which I'm not good about.
I might have to start buying Kindle and print. Do you know what we're talking about, Gerald? The fear line.
Yeah, I got a vague recollection of that. Is it something like, that it's the fear that kills them rather than there's something, isn't there?
Fear.
Maybe it isn't Farad who says it. I thought it was him. Also, I will say, when I first opened the book and I saw the long list of characters in the beginning, I was immediately intimidated.
Me too. Oh my gosh. Whenever I see a list of characters and I just promptly said, you know what? If I look at that, I'm going to stop reading. So, because I am horrible with character names and everything like that. So yeah, I'm so glad I didn't let it like really.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I don't like that either. If you have to have a list of characters, then there's too many characters or something, or you're not drawing them properly, or something.
That's my reaction.
It's not. And I thought, oh geez, there's so many people, but actually, I ignored that, and actually, I didn't have a problem keeping track of the major characters and who was
of
who
the major. I agree.
Happening.
Not at all.
Yeah,
not at all. Oh.
I did appreciate the list off for this discussion because I wanted to double check that Abu's last name was Anmar. So
I actually have that list open right now, just so you know.
Yes.
I cannot find it. I'll keep trying to find it.
Yeah, I want to find that line because I feel like it's a big part of like the thesis statement of this book. There's a few. I think the biggest one is this war is bizarre. It's surreal. There's all these different factions. They fall to infighting and nothing makes sense. Like it's very absurd.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let me see.
And it's like a lot of cities where all we see of them over here in the West is of destruction, as of military interventions and people dropping bombs on them. But actually, they're beautiful cities. They're great cities and got a fantastic history and great culture, and yet we don't appreciate any of that because we've never been there, we've never experienced it. But through this, you can begin to appreciate some of the best bits of the city.
Yeah. So what do you guys, I guess I'll go with Gerald because I think Colette's still looking for the fear quote, which I do want. Gerald, so what did you make of the Department of Tracking and Pursuit? More particularly, like, why do you think the author made up this department in his conception of like the Iraqi-American coalition army? Like, why make this up? You have enough with Frankenstein.
It's almost like a sort of, it's almost like subverting the idea of a police, a sort of police-stroke paramilitary force. It's the guy in charge of it he's a major. I think it's called Major something or other,
or Major Brigadier, something like that.
Yeah. So you get the idea that he's in charge of some sort of military paramilitary force, but he's I don't know, he's sort of subverting that idea by creating this bunch of crackpots who actually are doing what they said they're going to do. They come and they say this is going to happen, and towards the end he gets fed up because nobody pays attention to them, and people die, and people should be listening to these people. I don't know why he created them, but I'm glad he did.
Yeah. I found the quote here.
Oh, did you?
Is it
123, by the way? Page 123.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, finally found it. But just in response to what Gerald just said, yeah, or the question that you ask, Anis, it's funny because admission, I watch a lot. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. I watch a lot of true crime TV. It's the things that put me to sleep at night. But in any event, one of the things I've noticed just in terms of, and a lot of this is because it's sensationalist, when you listen to these podcasts and things, but one of the things I've noticed is there is this element of, you've got any kind of security force always wants to, live in the here and now, and we're dealing with facts, and we're dealing with threats, and we're dealing with the real world, quote unquote. And yet there's always this underpinning of, if we're at a loss, if all of our leads go cold, we'll be open to another world. We'll be open to, soothsayers and psychics. And so to me, this department takes that to an extreme. We've got to explore every avenue. And so we're going to even create this department that's secret, because nobody can know that we're going to indulge in this wacky world that we say that we don't believe in, but we can leave no stone unturned. And yet we're still not going to pay attention to it because we really don't believe in that. And that's really not true. So to me, it kind of mimics this other part of what gets dramatized sometimes when you look at these true crime stories detectives or any other kind of security force or protective force that's at such a loss that they're willing to indulge in another reality to trying to find an answer.
Yeah.
So I couldn't help make that parallel, and I enjoy it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also Saidi later in the book also has this, he has like a confession or something he sends to Mahmoud where he's like, there's all these, there's the physical laws the legal laws that everyone acknowledges, but then there's also these other laws that govern our existence that we don't want to acknowledge even as it happens. And he's sort of talking a little bit about these sort of like metaphysical, creepy kind of things that are out there.
That's spot on.
Sort of Yeah. So the fear line. So this was after remember the bridge that blows up and there's a lot of people on there, and a lot of people died trying to escape because there was rumors about a bomb coming. So whose fault is it? Is it the government for not stopping the car bomb? Is it the person who put out the rumor and caused the panic? All these different things are going on. And then Farid's on TV and he says, honestly, I think everyone was responsible in one way or another. I'd go further and say that all the security incidents and the tragedies we're seeing stem from one thing, fear. The people on the bridge died because they were frightened of dying. Every day we're dying from the same fear of dying. The groups that have given shelter and support to Al-Qaeda have done so because they're frightened of another group. And this other group has created and mobilized militias to protect itself from Al-Qaeda. It has created a death machine working in the other direction because it's afraid of the other. And we're going to see more and more death because of fear. That was great.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I highlighted the same passage because to me it was so, it so encapsulates an essential element of this book, which is everything is driven by fear. Even honestly, even Frankenstein is driven by because let's face it, a need for revenge, a need for vengeance, whatever. There is that element of fear because you've been victimized, and to try to stop feeling victimized even after death, you seek vengeance.
And by the end of it, and I was going to say, by the end of it, he stops with the pretense of vengeance altogether, and it's just this is what he does, and he needs to survive.
Yes,
he becomes just like any other group.
The eyeballs when he's losing his sight, when he finally realizes, when he's trying to justify killing an innocent. Well, he's going to die anyway. I shortened his life by maybe 15 minutes or maybe half an hour. So ultimately this had to happen anyway, and it's benefiting me because I am that vengeance machine that the world needs.
Beautiful justification to continue.
Fascinating. Killing. By the way, just speaking of the bridge incident, that made me notice, and I kind of checked back a few times. It was so interesting to me because we were on this whole department of the crazy department and tracking and pursuit. And one of the things I noticed was when the incident first came up, I think the astrologers were saying there were 1,000 ghosts, but the facts were that dozens had died. And then by the time we heard about it on television, it was that thousands had died. And there was I wondered about that. I wondered because that felt purposeful. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because I don't think it was a mistake in translation, but because I noticed it happened someplace else, and now I can't remember where the other place was. But it was really interesting to me that the initial prediction or facts would be one thing, and by the time they were referenced again, there would be an inversion of numbers. Of things, people who actually died or things that actually happened. And it feels like that's something that happens in the media. You get misreporting and misinformation, and then it's hard to identify, especially in this age where we've got reporting happening too quickly because we have this need for instantaneous information. There's a lot of misinformation that floats out there. And I just thought that was it wasn't a major part of the book, but I felt like it actually was, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought it was there, and it really interested me because it does mimic what happens in reality.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. I thought there was a line later on. Someone else had said something about spirits waiting for bodies as well, kind of like what the guard was doing. So I thought maybe not all of the ghosts that the astrologer saw had died as a result of the bridge explosion. Maybe some of them were just, there's a lot of ghosts all over Baghdad. They're just all concentrating there. And that alone, just a concentration of dead spirits means something's going to happen there.
Yeah. But then by the time I think they were talking about it on that TV program, I think there was a reference in there when they say that thousands died. And I looked and I thought, no, wait a minute, that's not right. So I went back in the book and I looked, and when they initially talk about the bridge, it was that dozens died.
But I think,
well, I wasn't sure.
I'm reading on 122. I think they're saying if the criminal had blown himself up, there would have been thousands of victims today, is what they said on the TV.
Okay, because so I think the bomb didn't go off. That. Okay, I thought that they said in any event, thousands still had died. But that's so...
No, I think
good. So I misread.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent, Colette, I think you're absolutely right. I think it because there's something later in the book where they're closing in on the Frankenstein, and they send Majid to the place where the Frankenstein is, and the junior wizard guy had sent a bomber there instead. So I think there's an idea that the Department of Tracking and Pursuit, they're sort of getting the right idea, but sometimes not interpreting it properly.
Yes.
And I think there is that parallel to the reporting now that they say, oh, here's a new story and this is what is happening. And it's too soon, and there's no evidence, and they're misreporting, and they're pretty close to it, but it's not actually what is happening. So I think that was a deliberate act on the part of the writer to introduce that to the story.
Especially because we have the whole reporter, the reporter evolving into the editor. Well, that whole storyline, explores that world in a very interesting way, unexpected way too. The whole filmmaker, director, lover, that whole storyline, which we haven't even touched on. I don't even know how to touch on that, given the context of everything else. It was fascinating. Because even the initial report of Frankenstein, with the headline that gets transformed into that sensationalistic, headline, to grab readers, and then whenever anyone's talking about the story behind the scenes, it's all fantasy. It was written as fact, but it's really all fantasy. It's from a storyteller. He doesn't know anything. And yet it's published in the paper, assumedly as fact. The whole story of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the owner of the magazine changed the headline of the article. So I can't remember what he called it, but the owner said, no, that's no good. Frankenstein in Baghdad, to the punchier, more excitable headline.
Mm-hmm.
Clickbait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad we're starting to talk about the whole magazine thing, because there's so many subplots, and you spend a lot of time with Mahmoud al-Saidi and Nawal, the filmmaker. So much so that I distractedly thought that must have been the main plot, and it was not. So there's a lot of subplots. There's the Alishba subplot, the Mahmoud one, everything with Brigadier Majid, and I feel like there's more that I'm missing. I mean, Hadi kind of has his own thing, trying to get the guy's furniture, the guy who goes to Russia. I mean, there's a lot.
Which is a setup for him getting Alicia's furniture, which then ends up being burned up.
Yeah, because nothing matters and it's also real.
Yeah.
So what was your favorite subplot, Colette?
Alicia. Well, no, I take it back. I think Hadi. I love, he's so despicable. I tend to like unlikable characters. But again, I kept going back to, he's so despicable, and yet he tells phenomenal story. Like, people are captivated by him, even though he smells and he's drunk all the time, and people don't believe, they think he's a liar, and yet everybody can't wait to sit down and talk to him. And then he becomes humanized by his love for his best friend who's blown to bits, and he's in a sense a father figure to Daniel the Frankenstein. And he's so masterfully woven into the story and then becomes such a sympathetic figure when not just everything he's finally managed to cobble together. He's become to this realization, I'm going to remake my life. And then it's remade for him because he almost dies in this horrible fire because of a bombing. And it's almost like he is this horrible thing, still horrible, but rising from the ashes. He's a horrible phoenix rising from the ashes. So I really love that storyline because he seemed to tie everything together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same. I just love this guy. He just, he's sort of despised by everyone, and everyone mistreats him. But when he's telling his stories, everyone gathers around because they love the way he tells his stories, and just the sort of chaotic way that he lives his life, and scraping a living by buying and selling furniture and things like this. He's just a great character, great sort of weird, slightly unpleasant, but fascinating character.
So was that also your favorite subplot, Gerald?
Yeah.
So what's your second favorite? Just to talk about another.
I don't know. I suppose the journalist, Mahmoud, and how he doesn't really know what's going on with his boss and the woman, and I quite like that way that he's sort of in charge, but he's been given the responsibility but no control over things, and in the end he has to sell all his own stuff so he can pay people's wages. So I quite liked that.
And what do you think Saidi actually stole the $13 million from the U.S. Aid funds, or no?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
Oh yeah. I couldn't help it. He is probably, in my mind, the most despicable character, the least
he had
redeemed
no
character. Yeah, he didn't. And yet I really thought he was great, and he felt complex and real in his own way, because he is representative of a very real element, or he's one of those human beings who rises to the top in these horribly adverse circumstances because he knows how to take advantage of everyone. So he feels quite real.
Yeah, and early on in the book, remember, Mahmoud sort of realizes this. He's like, that no matter what's happening around, Saidi seems to keep climbing, and if I'm like him, then I'll keep climbing too. He has that thought in that very clear
way. And yet
he
can't be like him, and by the end, he feels like he has to sell everything and pay all his debts. He can't just run away.
Yeah.
And I liked that about Mahmoud. He still felt like very much a follower and kind of muddling through, and yet he does have that core of goodness in him that can still exist in these horrible circumstances. So I really like it. I have to say though, Alicia, one of the things I loved about the Alicia
yeah, she froze again.
Oh, did I freeze again?
Yeah. So you were saying the Alicia subplot?
Well, it's not just, it's one of these things. She's not just it's not just a character who exists in war times, the older woman who can't leave her circumstances because she's lived there forever and who cares about danger. She's basically everyone's destiny. She really is. You grow old and people try to make demands on you, and people try to change your life and force you to live places you don't want to live, and eventually you make a choice, and you lose something. And did I freeze again?
No. I'm just thinking about what you're saying.
Yeah, I feel like as I'm getting older in particular, but there is this element. She's got this great loss, and and she's elderly, and she's lived her whole life in this place, and her daughters have moved away, and they want her, they want to move her so that they can take care of her. And she's resisting. And she's a mother, and also the fact that she's a mother to this grotesque creature because she's so desperate to have her son back. She was a fascinating character, and the discussions with the saint painting
Yeah.
It was really quite bizarrely lovely.
Yeah. Have I frozen? Everyone's
I
frozen
think
for me.
Annie is frozen. Yeah?
No,
Annie, can you hear me?
Annie,
She's frozen on my
I
screen.
I can hear you. Yeah, she.
Oh, she dropped out. Am I wrong? Did she drop out?
No, you're right. She
Oh, good. It's
froze
not
and
just
then-
me.
No. How weird.
Lordy, what is going on today?
I don't know.
Well, at least we're still
I don't-
recording.
I blame the Russians. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
I usually my knee jerk is to blame Trump somehow for everything. Is that a bad thing? And I guess then,
no.
By connection, the Russians, yes.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
Oh God, the fact that I'm having these discussions, I am in various writing groups because I have to be in many because that's just me. And the fact that even in my writing groups, we are pausing to have these heated debates. And in some writing groups, shockingly enough, we're not all liberals.
Right.
But we're all on the same page these days.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it is strange.
Yeah, I can't help bring him up. The evil orange.
Yeah.
I have various names for him that are probably not broadcastable.
and we're going to have a new prime minister soon. And it's probably going to be
dear Lord,
the buffoon Boris, who's in Trump's pocket, it seems.
Buffoon Boris, I love that. I'll be quoting you.
Good, please do. It's
I will, believe me.
Yeah, it's because he's created this character for himself as this sort of cheery, bumbling fool that talks about the old days of cricket and British spirit, and we can do this, boys, and all this sort of stuff. And everyone thinks, oh, isn't he cute? But he's going to be running this country, and
that's a deceptively more benign caricature that he's created for himself that does it mimics what Trump has done here. He's certainly more aggressive and more nasty and more vicious and more everything, but they're making certain positions that were so reprehensible in the past much more acceptable, and it's frightening.
Oh yes. Hi, Anise.
Hi. I'm not sure what happened. Colette froze for me, and then I lost connection.
Yeah. It's been a bizarre day of connectivity.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I was thinking about when you were mentioning the Elishva plot, actually, it was a third fantastical element, which is that St. George was talking, and the narration made efforts to let you know, no, she's not imagining this. He's literally speaking right now. Mm-hmm.
I loved that. I can't, there's the Catholic in me. I was raised very Catholic, and for a speaking saint, I'm thrilled. Like an actual speaking saint. It just made me laugh every time. And just his judgments and the fact that she would look at his face, and if he looked a little stern, she knew he wasn't going to get anything out of him that night because he was resisting her. And it was, oh my God, loved it.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the hour, so let's get to the last thing we always talk about, which is the prose, and in this case, also the translation. Gerald, what did you think of the prose?
Fantastic. Either the prose or the translation, but it didn't read like a translation. It read like it had been written in the native English. At no time did it feel awkward or just really, really well done. It's like the translator read the story and then recreated it instead of translating. So it really hats off to whoever that was.
Yeah, I agree. I found the prose, it was so readable. There was nothing, it wasn't showy. The prose serviced the story. And I think particularly with a story like this one that's so complicated and has so many different characters and so many different fantastical elements that we forget, we just take them as, oh wait, that was a fantastical element. So to come up with prose that services the story instead of exceeds the story was wonderful. It was really enjoyable for me. And you're right, Gerald. It didn't read like a translation. It read seamlessly as if it had been written in that this was the native language in which it was written.
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about the prose, it was not flowery. It was very straightforward, and it just said things, even things that were sensational in a very plain language. And it reminded me of Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, which did a similar thing.
Yep, I agree. Well, I think that's such a wonderful way to attack this kind of story.
Yeah.
Because then we're not struggling with the language on top of all the other complexities of the story.
Yeah. Also, not really about the prose, but occasionally there were little, references to things that I looked up. The Masha Rabia window balconies. Did you guys Google this? Gorgeous.
No,
what a loss.
Really? I have to look that up.
Loss. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Losing even just one of these. They're all very different, but they're like these wooden like boxes that come out that are really ornate and fancy. They're just incredible.
I have to say that the setting descriptions when they were there, and they were so essential. You know, I did feel like, for instance, we were talking about Crazy Rich Asians the other night at a dinner party, and I was saying one of the things that drove me crazy about that story was that eventually the setting descriptions felt almost disconnected. No, not almost. Felt disconnected from the story because they were there just to be there.
Yeah.
All of the setting descriptions here felt essential to the story. And you're right, those visuals of the furnishings, the antiques that people were losing, that were burning up, eventually all felt essential. And the distant surroundings, the setting details were really wonderful.
Yeah. I just had the picture of one of my favorites in the book club podcast. Gerald, give it a thumbs up. It's so pretty.
Oh, good. I have to go look.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous. Yeah. Okay. So I think anything else you guys want to add before we wrap up?
No, this was such a pleasure. This was an absolute pleasure.
And surprising. I will say, Gerald, I was a little nervous in the beginning, like you were. I thought it might be a little bit like too heavy, and I was just like, because remember, I wanted some light things. We tend to read stuff that's very heavy. And the last two books that we read, The Bridegroom Was a Dog, was light, so that was good, but very short.
Very
so
light,
a little more time. But then, before that, Black Leopard, Red Wolf was not light. So, like, this was just refreshing. It was taking a difficult... Yeah. This was very... When your book about the Iraq War in Baghdad is lighter than your fantasy. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay. So, next month, we're reading The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. Does not sound like a light title, but maybe we'll be surprised. Yeah. But Lost Children Archive is probably going to be a bit heavy, but okay, we had some lightness. As you read the book, and actually it feels a little flippant to say this book was light. I guess what I'm just saying is it was still exploring something heavy, but it never felt maudlin. Maybe that's what we mean. It never felt
dense. It wasn't dense in terms of, despite the complexity and the numerous characters, it was compulsively readable and easy to follow. Despite the complexity. So I think that's what you were talking about.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So we're reading The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. As you read, let us know your thoughts on Twitter with the hashtag LRH Book Club, or join our discussion on Facebook. We have a group called the Literary Roadhouse Readers. A link is provided in the show notes. And please, please, please leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker. It really helps us a lot. It helps other people find us. And if you would like to help support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. All right. Thank you both for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, guys. This was so much fun. As usual.
So much fun. I always love discussing with you guys.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right, Tom. Lovely.
See